What is the Archives Project? It's an interdisciplinary art research project similar to the History Project that came before it, and there have been many others. The History Project was a novel that started in 2001 and a project, an art research project of the same name. And the novel is about a project, a fictional one, in a novel of the same name as the novel and the other outer project that I created. So like a fractal or self-similarity. That project, the novel at least, was a failure, and the project within the novel was a failure, the History Project, I mean. And the premise of the Archives Project is to investigate the archives of the History Project to figure out why it was an abject failure. And the same characters that were in the History Project get together in the Archives Project with a few new characters, and they make two teams, a Postmortem team and a Premortem team. The Postmortem team investigates the failure through the archives of the History Project, and the Premortem team looks at the possible risks involved and the possible modes of failure of the Archives Project itself. Now, these novels are novelistic phenomenologies. They involve metafictional elements, and it's post-colonial historiographic metafiction, and at least the first one novel was the History Project. The Archives Project is not so much post-colonial, but it is historiographic metafiction, and it involves all sorts of characters. I mean, there's a script supervisor. The author, first of all, inserts himself, I myself, AG, I insert myself into the novel, and I hire a script supervisor to help me maintain the continuity of the storyline in the novel. And the script supervisor has an assistant named Fatima. The script supervisor is called Octavius IV, and Fatima has a younger brother called Elijah Sahid, who's an autistic boy from New England, and he has a vision of the beginning of time, of a place called Nous, which is this sort of palatial, crystal-like diamond, almost this shining brightly. It's this orb of like pure goodness and light at the beginning of time. It's a place, and it has the invisible forces that are these sort of subjectivities, these subjective beings historical beings that are born of Nous, and then they give birth to Maud, M-A-U-D, but also Maud is an M.O.D for Mother of Dreams, an abbreviation. Anyways, in his visions, Elijah Sahid, he sees Nous, and Nous becomes Antinous, and then they have a conflict together, and then it breaks up into Antiphase Cloud and then they create construction land, I think, which is this mathematical modeling type place, which is just this pure generativity where all content of dream and reality is generated. It's similar to the Dream Assembly in the History Project. Anyway, so in the History Project, the character, a retired psychiatrist from St. Petersburg, Dr. Viktor Kropotkin, he invented historical therapy. And it's basically that there's historical pathologies. He used a medical model to model history, and he saw that what he called historiopathies or historical pathologies, and he found a way to heal them through historiotherapy, historiotherapeutics, if you will. But I'll get into that maybe. But in the new novel, the Archives Project, he develops him further into Historiomics, and then with the help of a new player in the team called Paula Benjamin, which is an archivist, a world-renowned archivist. She helps him and the others develop Historionautics, and then eventually Historiotronics and chronotronics, and throughout all of it, the concept of Historiophany comes, and that comes from one of the characters, Johannes Panikar, which is he's a Catholic mystic from Palestine. He's a biblical scholar, specializes in biblical hermeneutics and exegesis, and he helps them come up with this concept of historiophany. And what I want to say though is that the novel is all about historiophany at this point. It's taken over my entire art practice. It's a concept that I'm obsessed with, that I have to talk about, but it makes its apparition in first appearance, I guess, in the Archives Project novel. And basically, there's a historiophanic continuum. On one side is historiopathy, the historical pathology, which can be disruptions in the flow of history, disruption, dysfunction, disorder, disarray, all of those things. It can be things like the French Revolution, where that's a historiopathy. It's in any group of a certain size, you can have historiopathies, historical pathologies, and that my argument is that makes up history. But what makes up the other side of the historiophanic continuum is the historiophany, which is a historical revelation or manifestation. And that can be as simple as like just hearing a church bell and going into having a kind of historical epiphany, where you're taken out of your moment in time and into another era, another place and moment in time. And so it's like the literary epiphany, like in James Joyce, and I think Virginia Woolf to some extent has this literary epiphanies, and you can find that and follow it all the way back to the Romantic poets and writers like Wordsworth. And this historiophany, though, goes even deeper than that. It's a sort of revelation of history. It's kind of like the end of history, not the end as the finality, but the sort of destiny of time, the movement of time. It progresses, history and time progresses. Historiophany is inevitable because we're time-based creatures. Its temporality is part of the universe, and it's non-linear, right? So Historionautics, when they come up with this, the characters in the novel, Historionautics is the navigation of historical data and the creation of historical systems. But Historiotronics is really where you get into the development of this actual technology and infrastructure of what later I'll call the Historios system, Historios. But to get back to the story, I mean, the characters put the author on trial in the history project because of his inability to write actual fictional characters that were authentically fictional and genuinely fictional. He couldn't write true or real characters. He had to make caricatures and cartoons out of people in his life and himself. The schizophrenic painter Alphonse Lemoyne is a caricature of himself with a history of substance abuse. He's a failure in his life. They're all like failures. They all have their own conflicts and their inner conflicts, and through the failure of the history project that they engage in, which is to try and discover why there's a higher incidence of anxiety and depression in the Greater Montreal area compared to the rest of Canada, which is false premise. But in that process, they all sort of self-transcend. In the new novel, they go even further, and I'll get into because the historical system is really where it all comes together. So the metafictional elements, that's it, the characters were putting the author on trial because they just feel trapped in the fiction. They feel like political prisoners in the fiction. They say, why, on what authority does the author have, to create us and to confine us to this measly existence in the fictional aspect on pages of paper as ink spots. And there's a grandiose trial and everything. And in the new novel, the Archives Project, it's a different aspect. There's two new characters. Conan the Humanitarian, which is a reality game judge, and he's a metafictional character. And there's a color commentator called Lou Beatty. The color commentator just comments on the action and all. He comes in and out, and he's an analyst. He's an expert in fiction. He says, oh yes, the author is doing this, and they're going on doing this, and he's constantly, and it's really rapid, like watching a hockey game or something, or a prize fight. And the reality game judge, well, he's a cartoonish, buffoonish character, kind of like, I won't say who he's sort of based on, but it's someone who's very belligerent and doesn't listen to people and always talks loud and says falsities, and he starts putting the characters on trial, and he starts saying you're stupid, you're an idiot, and you Pocahontas or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. So it's Conan the Humanitarian, and that's kind of an irony. Anyways, the Archives Project in the novel, the fictional project, is also an abject failure because they were studying the failure of a system an archive of a history project or a project, and it's an allegory for the abject failure of the civilizing mission, of the civilizational project, of history itself, of the historical project, of history, which tries to, to be scientific. And that's what Historiomics was all about, because it was kind of like this epigenome or the human human historiome, I call it. It's like the shape of the population history. It's kind of like this, you can imagine this machine that prints out this tape, this like textual tapestry or something, like a textile, and there's writing on it, and that's the historiome. It's the shape of all that's going on, all historical data that's being created, this movement in time. It's all being written, in a sense, in the moment, categorically, as it comes into existence. And it's undeniable, but it's irretrievable. The past is irretrievable. It's lost forever. And Historiomics was a science sort of based on genomics, but of the human historiome. And it was a psychiatrist, Dr. Victor Kropotkin, that came up with the help of the chair of philosophy of a prominent university in Montreal, Dr. Evelyn, who used to go out with the painter Alphonse Lemoyne. And with that study becomes Historionautics, which is more of the navigation, not in a non-linear manner. And that involves like systems of informational systems, like based on what I call database arts in the ref cards project. When ref cards are like index cards, kind of like an early card catalog, online card catalog for libraries, or the Mundanium by Paul Outlet, which is a kind of web of index cards, that have like a concept on each card taken from, like, their references and snippets or citations from literature, from writing, from the humanities or whatever other discourse. So Historionautics is the navigation of history, of the historical data systems, and Historiotronics is more of the infrastructure, the technology that you build out of it. And I won't get into chronotronics. That's more has to do with just time itself and time-based systems and temporality. Because what they end up creating is the Historios system, which is this massive sublime warehouse, I call it, which takes like over the whole planet, the whole historiosphere, and it's a simulation. It's a virtual reality and augmented reality. It's a mixed reality system. It simulates and virtualizes history itself, all of human history. It has these generative AIs that continuously create historical timelines and objects and landscapes, and it does so in the virtual and augmented reality, and it's massive. Like basically you go through it and you can navigate history through the Historionautics mode, and you have the Historiotronics mode, where it's more mathematical and lines and dots and numbers. It's like what's behind the reality, the sort of quantum probabilistic noise field, I like to call it. And the ref cards is just a database system that sort of sustains and maintains the whole infrastructure. Anyways, that's pretty much what it is right now. The reality game judge and the color commentator bring a new aspect of the novel, of the metafiction. And the characters, well, they do the postmortem and premortem analyses, and they look at the archives, and then it's all about the archives as an exhibition. It becomes kind of exhibition, a curatorial grammar and spatial poetics and the politics of placement, of a sort of curation of an exhibition. Because really what Historiophany taught me is that I have a phenomenological experience, a lived experience, first-hand witness, what I call the witness box or historiotech, and that is transformed through art into literary or artistic, aesthetic experiences, but they have lingering like traces, if you will, like these trailing traces. And so the artist, through artistry, takes those fundamental phenomenological experiences, transforms them into aesthetic objects, and it sort of exhibits it to the world in this curatorial way, revealing itself in the historiophanic experience. That's all really I wanted to say for today. I'm kind of tired, didn't sleep so well, and My camera's messed up. It keeps not functioning properly. So thanks for listening.